Alright, so we've learnt about light waves and how they move. So the next thing we're going to learn about is what happens when light hits a material. So when light hits a surface of a material, it can do three different things. But let's just talk about what surface means. Firstly, the surface is the boundary between two different materials. We might have the boundary between air and glass, which might be the air outside your house, and then the boundary to the glass in your window. Or another boundary might be between water and a rock at the bottom of a river. So when light hits a surface, there are three different things that it can do. The first thing that it can do is it can be reflected. And you might know what reflected means. It means that the light rebounds back from where it came from. The light wave rebounds off the surface. And when we look into a mirror, this is what happens to the light wave. We have air, and then we have the boundary to the mirror. And when light hits the surface of the mirror, it is reflected off that surface. Another light wave reflected again off the mirror. And the second thing that light can do when it hits the surface of a material is it can be absorbed. And absorbed means that the light is collected or received by that material. So this often happens on the ground, where we have the boundary between the air in the atmosphere and soil on the ground. And when light rays from the sun hit the soil, a lot of those are not reflected, but they're absorbed into the soil. And what we find is that when light is absorbed, it heats up the material that it is absorbed into. So absorption heats up materials. That's why you feel warm when you're standing out in the sun, because you're absorbing the sunlight. And the third thing that light can do when it hits a material is it can be transmitted. And transmitted means the light waves move through that material. And a really common example of this is if we have a piece of glass in a window. We have air on the outside, and then we have glass here, and the boundary between the two. So when light waves come through the air and hit the glass, they're transmitted so they go straight through the glass. And that lets us see through that object. There is a fourth thing that light can do when it's transmitted, which is called refraction. And we'll learn more about refraction later, but for now you can picture it as the light is still passing through the material, but it bends at the surface. Okay, the next thing we'll talk about is we've seen how light can interact with materials, but what does that mean that materials look like? Because there are a few different ways that materials can appear when we see them. So what does a material look like? And there are three different categories that we can use here. The first one is when we have an object like a brick wall. Bricks in a brick wall. So when light comes in to hit a brick wall, none of the light is transmitted through. All of the light waves are either absorbed into the bricks or reflected at different angles. So this type of object is called opaque. The light is reflected and absorbed, but none of it is transmitted. And the result is that we can't see through that material. The second option is something like frosted glass, if you've ever seen that, often on a bathroom door to give privacy. With this type of glass, some of the light is transmitted through the glass, but other light is reflected off. And some of it passes into the glass, but then is reflected out. So when some light is transmitted, we call this object translucent. Because some light passes through, but not all of it. And the result is that the object looks foggy or frosty. And in particular, some of the light waves are scattered. And scattered means once the light, so if we have air and in this example the glass, some of the light comes into the glass, but then it hits particles in the glass and then it rebounds off those in different directions. And that's what we call scattering. And the final type of material that we see is something like a window. And when light hits a window, we know what happens. It passes straight through the window. So the object is see-through. And the scientific name for see-through is transparent. So for transparent objects, the light passes through and we can see through them.